Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is William T. Thompson. No relation, although who knows. he graduated with an engineering degree from the Air Force Academy, but ended up attending law school and working as an attorney for many years. And he's also a board member of the National Speakers Association. He's also worked at Delta Airlines. He's lived quite an interesting life. I'm curious to find out how he decided to go to law school after getting an engineering degree, his work with Delta, and the various boards he's served on. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, T.
It's a pleasure to be with you, my friend. Good to be here.
So I mentioned in the intro that you got a degree in engineering from the Air Force Academy. What motivated you to go to the Air Force Academy and get a degree in engineering?
Well, I was walking home from school one day, and I was feeling kind of down because I had gone to what had been an all-white high school in the Deep South. And so the folks, majority of folks had been giving me a hard time. So I'm walking down this dirt road on my way home, and all of a sudden the ground started shaking, and I heard this loud roar as a sleek Air Force jet flew right over the top of my head. And it was so low that I could smell the fumes from the jet engines. I thought this thing was about to crash. Then the pilot pulled it up, and he went straight up in the air. I mean, it literally disappeared up into that clear blue sky. Now, you got to understand, I had never flown on an airplane before at that time, had never even seen one close on the ground. And so watching this whole phenomenon take place in front of my very eyes was just the most exciting and exhilarating thing that I'd ever seen. And that's where the seed of my dream to fly a jet came from, and why I ended up trying to go to the Air Force Academy. I was successful. I was actually the first African-American from South Carolina to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy.
Wow, that's great. That's impressive. That's amazing. I mean, from not even seeing a plane up close and then going to the Air Force Academy, and then then I meant also in the intro, then you went to law school. How did law school end up being the final destination after Air Force Academy and studying engineering?
Well, I got stationed out in California in the Air Force flying. I was an instructor pilot, and I had a good friend who was not associated with the military at all. In fact, he was working in politics at the state capitol. We became friends. He invited me over to his home, that sort of thing, and we ended up doing a little business venture together. And that spurred my entrepreneurial juices. And he recommended that I consider going to law school. He said, if you're going to be in business, you should either go back and get an MBA or a law degree. And I said, well, why would I get a law degree? I could see the MBA. He said, well, you can have more flexibility with a law degree, and you can intimidate people with a law degree, because if you're dealing with somebody and they know that you're a lawyer, you got an extra leg up. And I had my VA benefits that I had not used, GI Bill. And there was a law school in town at the time in Sacramento, University of the Pacific, that had an evening program. And so I applied and got accepted. And that was my motivations, to have a background in business. So, and to have a backup in case, for some reason I couldn't fly, had a medical problem or that sort of thing, and I could at least have another profession that I could still go out and have the potential to make good money in.
Gotcha. So were you a pilot and an attorney all at the same time?
I was a pilot and an attorney. I was flying at night in the air. I was flying during the day in the Air Force. I was going to law school at night. I got out of the Air Force and got hired by Delta as a pilot. And I got stationed in Boston, which I chose because Boston had a number of law schools. Harvard was my focus at the time. And I knew that I'd be able to get my last year of law school finished while I was flying with Delta. And I did that. Finished my last year of law school, my first year with Delta.
Oh, okay. So you started off at law school in Sacramento, but you finished in the Boston area?
Yes, although I still got my degree out of the University of the Pacific, because if I could use the analogy, it was kind of like going to, what's the word I would use? I'm drawing a blank, but I did my last year in Boston, but they sent the credits back out to California, and I got my degree out of California. So I wouldn't lose credits by transferring. So I never did transfer. It was just going to school at another campus that the University of the Pacific allowed me to go to.
Gotcha. Okay, that was great. It would have been horrible if all of that work had been, kind of left to the wayside and you had to start all over again.
Yeah, lose a lot of credits. And it's an interesting fact. I actually passed the bar exam and was certified as a lawyer before I finished law school.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was possible.
Okay, so what had happened? So I got 3 years of law school done. I go to Boston. I had to take a semester off from law school to get trained by Delta and to get repositioned. And so I started law school again in January. And so I went to school from January to December to finish the last year. And the bar exam was scheduled in Massachusetts for February, but my official graduation wouldn't have been until the following May because there was no mid-year graduation for law school. Okay. And so since I had completed all my requirements in December and I had to wait another 6 months to actually graduate and get my degree, I petitioned the Massachusetts bar to allow me to take the bar exam since I had completed all the requirements, but for actually getting the degree. And they allowed me to take the bar exam in February. I got my results back in May that I had passed, and then I graduated from law school in June.
By that time, you're just like, look, I already passed the bar. I'll give her this paper. I'm bona fide now. What kind of law did you practice?
So I focused in tax and finance, and the reason for doing that as well was the fact that I had heard and was aware, but didn't understand how owning a house was a good tax break. And the guy that I had mentioned before in California, who was my friend, who had suggested that I go to law school, lived well. And he was not that much older than me at the time. I was 26, he was 31. So he was like my older big brother. But as I look back on it now, 31 is not that old. But he was living in a nice big house on the river. He and his wife had his and hers Mercedes. And I said, Charles, how do you live so well? He said, man, I live good because I understand taxes and I understand saving and investing. I said, okay. He said, a guy like you, you're single, you're not in a house, you live on base in the officers' quarters. He said, they're probably taking half your money in taxes out here in California. And I said, no way. He said, I bet you. Go home and look at your pay stub. Now, I had never looked at my pay stub before because my money was automatically deposited from the government into, the credit union. And so when I got my check, quote unquote, it was a non-negotiable check in an envelope. And I just throw it in the desk because I know the money had already gone into my account. So there was nothing to do with the quote unquote check, right? Mm-hmm. The non-negotiable check. And so I went home after that evening and I actually looked at my pay stub. And I looked at the amount of money that was deducted for federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare and all of that. Plus I'm in California, which is a high tax state. I'm single, no deductions, no kids, and so they're taking a big chunk out of my check. And it was literally 49% of my paycheck went to one sort of tax or another. And I was shocked. I felt it was so unfair, and I thought this cannot stand. I got to do something about this. And so when I went to law school, I started taking tax courses so I could understand better, how the tax system worked. I took tax sheltered investments. Tax was not a requirement in law school. I took tax 1, tax 2, tax 3. So I really got into it primarily for my own edification. And when I ended up in Boston and finished law school, passed the bar exam, and opened a business, that's what it was: tax and financial consulting for high net worth individuals, most of which were airline pilots and doctors.
Hmm.
So I had a natural client base in my other job with Delta.
Wow. Man, back in them times, maybe you could have used Donald Trump's lawyers.
Yeah,
get,
exactly.
get some of that money back, man.
Yeah.
49%? No, man. That's
Oh,
ridiculous.
that's crazy.
That's crazy. So, I also mentioned in the intro that there have been a number of boards you've been on. Where did the interest in serving on boards come from?
Well, I started out at the American Cancer Society board in Massachusetts, a local board. I had gone to a Cancer Society event, a party at this very chic castle on the ocean. And the reason that I ended up there was because a friend of mine who lived in the same town, I lived in a suburb north of Boston, was a flight attendant for Delta. And she and I met on the airplane, and she and I became friendly. Her husband was a former pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles, and he and I became friendly as well. And we would play tennis at time. He was retired, and they ran a florist business, right? High-end florist business. Um, and so she was doing the flowers for this particular Cancer Society event at this castle out on the water. And because she was donating the flowers, obviously her place setting was the most spectacular place setting for all the tables for the event, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened that her husband, whose name was Dave, his good friend was a guy named Jim Palmer at the time. Jim Palmer was a Hall of Fame pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles, where Dave had pitched as well. And Palmer happened to be in town that weekend, so he was invited to the event as well. And then I had another friend who was on local TV, who was also invited and at that table. So we had kind of like the little celebrity table, if you would, with the big centerpiece and all of that. So the lady who was the executive director of the Cancer Society for that area came over and said, "Well, I know who everybody else is. Who are you?" Because I'm the only non-famous person at the table, right? So she and I got to talking. She happened to be an African-American woman. And when she found out that I was a pilot for Delta and a lawyer, she said, "I need you on my board," you know. And I said, "Great, I'd be happy to serve." And that was the beginning of a 25-year career as a volunteer with the Cancer Society. I went from the local board to the state board. I chaired the state board, and then I ended up on the national board as well. And it's kind of, once you get in, everybody wants you, so to speak. And so because other people on the board are involved with other organizations or financial institutions and that sort of thing. And so it just so happened that the chairman of the board of the state Cancer Society was also on the board of a bank, financial institution, and he and I became good friends. And he invited me to be on the board of that bank board. And then, one thing led to another, and that's kind of how it all started.
Oh wow! Just from being at a party, a table, a
Yeah,
table.
exactly.
That's crazy,
And I
man.
was relatively new to Boston. I figured, well, that'd be a good way to give back and to meet some new people and, kind of get settled in the community, so to speak.
Nice. That's great. I mean, it's funny how life works out sometimes. You're not expecting something, and then something kind of falls into your lap, and then that leads to something else, and then something else, and it's just a, a bevy of just good experiences all around. Hopefully.
Absolutely. There's an old saying that 80% is just showing up. And that is so often the case.
Yeah, you
Just
got to
taking a
show
little
up.
initiative.
Yeah, you got to show up at a castle, so that's not a bad place to show up.
Right. Exactly.
So, from the boards that you've served on, I'm kind of curious. What's been your most, I guess, proud achievement from being on any of those boards?
Well, I guess the proudest achievement was going back out to the Air Force Academy to become president and CEO of the Alumni Association, which was having some problems at the time. And that was an opportunity to give back as well to my my alma mater. And we fixed the problem, and we grew the organization. When I got out there, we had 31 chapters across the country, alumni chapters. And we were about a $35 million operation. When I left, we had 87 chapters across the world, and we were a $60 million operation. And so to be able to go back out and to, number one, fix the problem and then grow the operation in the organization was one of my proudest achievements in that regard.
Nice. I mentioned it also in the intro that you're a board member of the National Speakers Association. How did that come to be?
Well, during my various years of service on various boards of one sort or another, I became a proponent of what's called strategic governance. And strategic governance, to kind of wrap it up big picture, is that a board of an organization should be strategically focused, big picture, long term, and not be involved in the operational day-to-day type decisions of an organization, which is why you have, an executive director or a president and a professional staff to do those things. And during my board service of various organizations, I can't tell you the number of times that the boards were more operationally focused in terms of some of the day-to-day operational issues instead of the big picture issues. And I didn't think that was correct. I became a proponent of strategic governance and helped institute strategic governance in several organizations over the years as a part of my board service. And the National Speakers Association's board is going through a transition as well. The chairman knew of my background both as running a major association, because we had 50,000 members in the Alumni Association, as well as my service as a board member in various organizations. And he asked me to come on the board and help them go through this transition. And I agreed to do that. And that's how I ended up on the National Speakers Association's board.
Okay. When it comes to implementing a more, as you mentioned, the strategic governance type model to these boards, did you get any kind of pushback from the boards that weren't that way initially? And if so, what was the pushback about?
Yeah, you do, because people are people, volunteers are all trying to do the right thing. They're volunteering their time. Most times you're not getting paid to be on a volunteer board. But people get very involved and connected to the organization, which is a good thing. But again, particularly for an organization that's already kind of operationally focused and not strategically focused, they're making decisions about, for example, well, what kind of computers do we buy? Or, if you're going to do new office furniture, what should it look like? Well, boards shouldn't be dealing with those kinds of things. It should be, as I said, big picture. Where do we want this organization to be in 3 or 5 years from now? Who are we going to serve? Those sorts of things. And those operational decisions about what kind of computers we need and all that, the president and the staff should be making those kinds of decisions because they're the closest ones to it. It's got nothing to do with the strategy of the organization. It's the day-to-day operational type stuff. And so you have to make a clear distinction between what is operational and what is strategic big picture for the organization.
Not really sure. It's funny. I'm not really sure why a board member would care whether you have a Dell or a piece or a Mac.
Well, exactly. And they shouldn't. But if that's the kind of decisions that you're used to making as a board, right, and you got a committee that looks at those things and that sort of thing, then, it's hard to pry that quote unquote power away from somebody that's used to having it, right?
Right.
And so they don't want to give it up.
Wow.
So, well, look, you can be much more effective by making much bigger decisions about the organization than whether they have a Dell or IBM or whatever,
Yeah, I'm sure that the actual staff actually would appreciate that, because now they get that, they get to focus on the things that, as you mentioned, that are closer to them, and you focus on the bigger picture issues.
Exactly.
It's a clear delineation of the powers. I think that
exactly
they would appreciate that. So yeah,
right,
makes sense to me.
Yeah, and and the other thing, just to kind of wrap up this piece, it's the normal life cycle of a nonprofit organization. Generally, when they start out, somebody has an idea about doing something good for the people, right? Whatever that happens to be. But you don't have any resources. And so you start out, few people, you get some friends involved or whatever, do some fundraisers. And then over time, if the organization, kind of catches on, so to speak, it starts growing. But the people that were there at the beginning are the people that now have to step up away and be more strategic because the organization has grown. It's got resources now to hire professional staff to come in and do those sorts of things, right? But you were so used to doing them as a volunteer because you were there at the beginning, and now it's hard to step away and be strategic when you've been making those kinds of decisions. So it's kind of the normal life cycle of an organization if it grows and becomes something significant.
For sure. When it comes to public speaking, what topics do you like to speak about?
My topic is on excellence. In fact, it's called the Flight to Excellence. And I use a combination of my aviation background and my lawyer and business background to put together a program that focuses on excellence in business and in life. And I think the concepts are equally applicable whether you're doing business or living on a day-to-day basis. And I got a process I call the P4 system to achieving excellence in life. And the 4 Ps are having the right principles, having good and the right people around you, having a plan, I call it a flight plan, and finally performing, having a bias for action, being able to perform. So those are the 4 Ps of the P4 system.
P4, principles, people, plan, performing. All right. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's a nice segue to my next question because you mentioned the process for your P4 system. Do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
Well, I sit down and I try to be, from a common sense perspective, relatively simple in terms of the components that I'm talking about, those 4 Ps. And then I use stories to illustrate the points that I'm making with those 4 Ps.
You're smart to incorporate stories into your presentations, T. When I first my whole motivation for even starting Teach the Geek was I had to give presentations in front of management when I worked as an engineer, and I was terrible at it, and I didn't incorporate stories. I didn't think it was appropriate. But it's not as if once you become an adult, stories become less important because when you were a child, you really like hearing stories. And when you get an adult, when you become an adult, you still like stories. But
Yes,
I didn't think it was appropriate, given these technical type presentations to incorporate stories. But especially if you're talking to people that are outside of that field of expertise, it becomes even more important just to keep their intention.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, stories are the key because we all like to hear stories
Yeah,
as opposed to sitting down and hearing a bunch of information. And so I make a key point, and then I give a story to illustrate that point, and then I reemphasize the point that I just made,
nice.
what the story has made.
Do you ever get nervous before you give a presentation? And if
Every
so,
time.
how do you deal with your nerves?
There was a story on that point about Bill Russell. And Bill Russell was a star player for the Boston Celtics back in the day, Hall of Famer. I think he played for the Celtics for 13 years. They won 11 championships during his tenure. Then he went on to coach the Celtics as well. But he would get upset before every game to the point that he would throw up. And there wasn't any medical issue associated with it. It was just that nervousness, that, getting ready to go out there and do battle, so to speak. Well, the one game, he tells a story that he didn't get nervous. He went out and said, I got this thing. It was the worst game he ever had. And so, so the point being is that that nervousness is almost a part of going out and performing at a high level, before you get on stage or before you get on the floor or whatever. And so it's natural among athletes. It's natural among speakers.
Hmm. Interesting. Now I wonder if he's thinking in his head, man, if I want this championship, I better get to that toilet and throw up.
Right.
You want to be, you want to have a toilet close by,
Yeah. Well, I think it's that energy. You're getting ready, you're getting suited up and ready to go, and there's that natural inclination to be uneasy, a little nervous, or whatever. And even I give a great speech, but before I get out there, I'm always just a little nervous, even though I know I practiced and I got it down. But then once I get on stage, I'm in the zone, so to speak.
I really like your point about telling stories, as I'm sure you can attest. Sure you know now, but do you have any other tips that you could offer people who want to become more effective at public speaking?
Yeah, practice. I've often been told or commented upon how, man, you just get up there and talk right off the top of your head. Well, it sounds like I'm talking off the top of my head because I have practiced it so much that it just flows naturally.
Right.
And so I don't even have to think about what I say because I've said it 50 times, right? And so repetition and practice, I think, are vastly underrated for people who are trying to speak or be a better speaker. I heard Bob Hope say that because these days, some people may not know who Bob Hope is, but he was a great comedian, actor, entertainer. And the same comment was made to him, how he could just come out and naturally have a line or this, that. And his comment was, yeah, you don't see the 6 hours that I spent, rehearsing and practicing, so that when I get on stage, it just flows naturally. So that would be the other advice that I would give. Take the time, put the effort in. As with most things in life, the more you do it, the better you get at it. That's why Michael Jordan would stay after basketball practice and shoot free throws. This is the greatest basketball player to ever play the game, but he would still be practicing after a game. Tiger Woods, same thing. One of the greatest golfers, arguably the greatest golfer. If he can catch Jack Nicklaus on the number of major championships, he's got, I think, 2 more. But after he shoots around, he goes to the driving range and practices. And so here are 2 guys that are the best to ever play their particular sport, and they're still putting that effort in to practice. That's how you become good. That's how you become great.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, T. I'm a big fan of practice myself. And one of the other benefits of practicing is you get to figure out the best way to present the information. If you just go up there and just off the top of your head, out of stream of consciousness, you might present it in such a way that it doesn't flow that well. But if you practice it beforehand, you'll know, well, okay, I'm going to put this part before this part, and then this part can come after it, and it can make more sense for the audience.
Absolutely. In fact, I gave a speech this morning before we got on this podcast, and I had been working on an intro, and I'd probably given the little speech that I gave this morning 3 times a day for the last 3 weeks. Okay. So that's probably about 60 times. And I just wasn't feeling quite right about one aspect of the intro. And this morning, it finally came to me. I could change just a couple words. In fact, it came to me, I was shaving in the bathroom, and I got it down right. And so, when I gave the presentation this morning, I used that. But because I've been working on it so long, I could feel that it wasn't quite right, although I didn't know exactly what I needed to change. And it finally came to me. But had I not been putting the time and effort in, I wouldn't have had that experience.
For sure. This has been really great talking to you, T. Thank you again for taking time. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, my website is CaptainTSpeaks.com. And the T is just the letter T, CaptainTSpeaks.com. You can go there and find out a lot more about me. You can also order my book there through Amazon. I just saw last week that it's in Barnes and Noble, as well as in NCAP, which is a big deal to have your book out on the front. And it's called The Flight to Excellence, Soaring to New Heights in Business and Life. Get the book. It's got the P4 system enumerated in there, and the website is how you can get in touch with me.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. Consider checking out the public speaking course, Teach the Geek to Speak. I also have an excuse assessment tool that you can get access to. To get access to the course, it's teachthegeek.com. For the excuse assessment tool, it's download.teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, T.
Thank you.